Welcome. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to our second episode of Art Up Close at the BCMA. My name is Claire Traum, and I'm a senior studying art history at Bowdoin, and I've been helping organize these webinars.
Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm a junior studying art history as well at Bowdoin. Been helping Claire and Elizabeth work through the webinar series. I'm really excited.
So for those of you who are new to this series, this is a webinar series aimed at connecting students with specific pieces of art in the museum. Each episode features a bite-sized presentation led by a Bowdoin student, a member of the art history faculty, or a museum staff member. So we hope you learned something new today, and we encourage you to ask questions after Professor Gerry's presentation. Our first episode, recorded 2 weeks ago, was on the Black Lives Matter movement in art and protest, and that will soon be posted on Bowdoin's YouTube channel. So we hope that you check that out when it is uploaded.
Yeah, so today we are excited to welcome Professor Gerry to speak about the Wyvern Collection in the Bowdoin Museum of Art. The Wyvern Collection comprises over 100 incredible works of Renaissance ivory carvings, sculpture, jewelry, and illuminated manuscripts. Currently, the exhibition is installed in the BCMA and will be on view until August 2021. You can experience the exhibition virtually through the Bowdoin Museum of Art's website or through the link that we will post in this Zoom chat. And this is the first exhibition of these objects from this private collection in North America, and we encourage you to tune in tonight to Professor Gerry's longer talk about the exhibition.
Professor Gerry is well poised to discuss these works given her extensive background studying manuscripts and small works of art made in Europe and in the Central Middle Ages. Professor Gerry has published papers in academic journals and collections of essays. She's co-authored the book, The Medieval World, and she's contributed to a number of exhibition catalogs and reference works. We are looking forward to hearing her presentation on Bowdoin's Wyvern Collection, and we encourage our virtual audience to engage with Professor Gerry and ask any questions you can think of. So with that, we will hand it over to Professor Gerry.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Claire and Lucy. I want to thank you especially for, first of all, for inviting me to be part of this series, but also just for taking the initiative to create this series. I think it's an excellent way to think about being able to continue and maintain the kind of community that our department has, even when we can't all be together on campus, and hopefully to expand that community outwards and welcome other people into things that we're doing in the department and into the museum. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to start the slideshow. I have a few slides that I want to show today. I'm going to limit my remarks to about 10 minutes. And I want to start off by, first of all, just thanking also the audience for being here today. This is an exhibition that we have been working on for over a year now at the museum on campus. And of course, it was intended to be an exhibition that people could enter and come into and see. In fact, we do have it. I have a couple of installation shots here. It is in fact installed in the museum, even though access right now is very limited to people who are on campus. But I hope that eventually we will be able to welcome people from the entire community back into the museum in person to see these wonderful works in person. And in the meantime, I'm really grateful to have platforms like this to share the exhibition with people and to make this a little bit more public. Here's another view of some of the works that are installed in the galleries right now. So putting together an exhibition like this, of course, takes a long time. I mentioned we've been working on it for over a year. This is built from a large loan made, a long-term loan made by a private collector from his larger collection known as the Wyvern Collection. And these pieces first arrived on campus in the spring of 2019. And from that point on, we began to conceive of the show and to figure out how to put these together into an exhibition, as well as using works from the collection in teaching on a pretty regular basis, not just in my own classes, but many people who are teaching across campus have made use of these works. Usually an exhibition is a kind of committee affair. It's something that no one person is responsible for. It is made possible by the extreme effort and engagement of museum staff, of colleagues. And I really want to point out that in this case, one of the really invaluable assets that I had to work with was student input. So particularly from students in a course that I led last fall, a seminar called Medieval Art and the Modern Viewer, I was able to really make use of student insights, the kinds of questions students asked, and the research that they were doing on objects in this collection as I was thinking about how to pull some of these pieces together into the present exhibition. And it's not just students in this particular class, although they really, the whole class was really dedicated to thinking about this exhibition. But even before then, a seminar I was teaching in the spring when these objects arrived, those students also, as soon as we were taking things out of the crates, they were over there looking at them and engaging with them and doing research and asking questions that helped me to think about the show. And students in all of my classes who I've brought to the museum to just to look at and work with some of these objects, all of them have really contributed to my thinking and helping to build the show. So that's been a really important part of this exhibition. The exhibition is designed around 3 main themes. And in some senses, if you're in the physical space, it is divided into 3 separate areas that really address each of these themes. But I think all of these themes run throughout the objects in the exhibition. And when I focus in on one work in a few minutes, I hope, demonstrate that many of these themes can be brought to light through any single object in the exhibition. So these are themes which are currently really driving research in medieval art history and in medieval studies more generally. And they're also themes that I think are engaging to a broader audience of non-specialists and ways of approaching art history and works of art that I hope can bring people in, right? Can help people to find connections between art that was made 1,000 years ago or 800 years ago and their own modern lives. So the first of these 3 themes is on the materials and the artistic techniques that are used in creating works of art in the Middle Ages. And it's a chance to just really highlight some of the types of media that were most preferred, that were favored by medieval artists and also medieval patrons throughout this long period of time. We have works here running from about 500 to about 1500 or even beyond a little bit. And I think it's just an interesting thing to point out that our own ideas about what are, we have a kind of, if we have a hierarchy of media, or if you think about, what kinds of works of art get the most money when they're for sale or you expect to see in a museum, it's really quite different, a kind of different set of priorities. So we might think of painting, if you go to a museum or a gallery, what do you expect to see? You expect to see paintings on a wall. And in the Middle Ages, that was not really the most important form of art. They had some wall paintings, but we think about paintings in books or especially small pieces of metalwork, reliquaries, objects that were used in liturgical practices, in church services, stained glass windows. These were the kinds of things that they really put their effort into and that they really placed a high value on. Another really important theme in this show is the idea of global networks in this period. And, we tend to talk about areas in isolation. So we use the term medieval and we're just thinking about Europe, or even to be more specific, we're just thinking about French manuscripts or something like that, or German cathedrals. And, none of those things are actually happening in isolation. They are all, any geographical location is one node in a larger network of interconnected movements and ideas. And so to think about what's happening in medieval Europe, think about that as a place where we can see the results of a lot of contact coming from trade, coming from religious pilgrimage, coming from diplomacy. Those are really feeding into what was developing in medieval art history. And the last theme just to touch on briefly is issues of identity and how people might use works of art to construct their sense of identity, to project that sense of identity. In the Middle Ages, probably class hierarchy and gender are 2 of the most important aspects of that we can bring out. So I do just want to, for the remaining few minutes here, look very quickly at one specific object, which I think can speak to and elucidate all of these themes. This is a type of work known as a Gemellion. It would have originally been one of a pair. There were 2, probably looked very similar. And one of them is, they're the same, except that one of them has a spout. And the idea is that one of them is a shallow basin and one holds water and you pour it over, and you'd hold your hands and kind of wash your hands as the water is pouring over into the basin. So when we look at this work, we can first of all see a very typical type of material used in this period, enamel. This is a type of decoration that's put on metal, usually on a copper or gilt copper substrate of metal. And it essentially involves taking ground glass powder and fusing that to the metal and having it turn back into kind of shiny gem-like glass. And you can, if you come in close, you can kind of see some of the recessed areas here where the blue color of enamel has been lost. And you can kind of see how they created these spaces in the metal to then fill with that enamel powder. We call this champlevé enamel. And that was often made at a region in France called Limoges, which was very famous for its production. And we know that works being produced in enamel at Limoges were exported all around Europe and beyond Europe. And so this piece can also speak to that kind of global exchange that's happening. So we find pieces of Limoges enamel in Denmark. You might immediately think, well, Denmark's not that far from France. But if your fastest mode of transportation is horse-drawn cart, it's a long way to Denmark, right? But we find pieces in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, in Jerusalem, all across Europe. There's even some evidence, inconclusive but suggestive, that works of champlevé enamel, of Limoges enamel, made it as far as China. We can also look at the subject matter in this and kind of get a sense of how people are using works of art like this to project some aspect of their sense of self. So this work is, you'll see in the title, it's called an armorial Gemellion. That's a really fancy way of saying that it has coats of arms on it, right? It has these signs of heraldry that often represented individual families or individuals within the higher classes of the aristocracy. But in a lot of cases, there are many Gemellions that survive that have coats of arms like this. And in a lot of cases, there's a kind of generic sense about them. Some of these coats of arms are identifiable and some of them are not. So here, for example, I've highlighted one of them. It's what we call a lion rampant, which means it's basically the silhouette of a lion as if it's standing up on its hind legs and putting its arms up. And that sign was used by many, many different upper class families at all levels of the aristocracy. So it's impossible to look at that and tie it to one specific family. And I think that sort of generic code here gives us a hint that this is not, it's not a sign of ownership by one person, but instead a sign of almost a kind of aspiration that the owner wants to make sure that they're a part of this class. They want to kind of insert themselves into this aristocratic class. An object like this would have been used at a dinner or a banquet. And so we can see them kind of just creating this atmosphere of wealth, of high society, and again, aspirational. They're probably not at the highest levels of that society, but they're trying to just sort of suggest that they're a part of that. So I've been talking for about 10 minutes right now. I could, of course, go on for a long time, but I want to stop and keep this manageable. And so I want to just turn the floor over for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my show here too.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Gerry. That was great. So I think we are going to start the Q&A section. So for our audience, feel free to submit any questions you have in the Q&A box. It should be at the bottom of your screen. And I think just to start off with a question, I'm definitely curious in hearing more about the research component that went into creating the exhibition and what that looked like, what type of research you were using, if you were using like primary sources, or I don't know, I guess what type of research you and the students were working together to create this exhibition.
Thanks, Lucy. That's a great question. You know, it's tricky to talk about research in an exhibition that has a lot of works of art, because I would love to be able to say that I'm an expert in every one of these works of art and I have spent the appropriate amount of time researching every single one. And of course, that just isn't possible once you know, maybe if you had a small exhibition of 3 or 4 pieces, you could really do that. But this is about 50, and once you get to that period, or that number of pieces, it's a little trickier. So for me, I think when I'm thinking about these works, the sort of initial approach to them is guided by my longer term awareness of this period. So over the course of my career, I've had a chance to study individual works of art, to teach a wide range of works of art, to see things all around in different museums. And so that background knowledge is hugely informative in getting started. And then once that kind of guides my idea about, you know, how am I going to fit how am I going to create these themes? How do these individual works fit within those themes? And then as as I'm getting more into that, then I would look at an individual work and go into more depth of research in that individual work, depending on how it was being used in the exhibition. I think as far as the student component of that, so to speak in a little bit more detail, the class that I taught, Medieval Art and the Modern Viewer, in that seminar, students were all asked to do fairly in-depth research on really 2 specific works of art and a couple of others also. But in the catalog for this exhibition, which you can purchase, I'll just hold up a copy of it here. Oh, it doesn't show up because it's the same color as the wall. But students contributed to this catalog, and in fact, their essays are also in the on the website, which I think the URL should be in the chat for the website. And so in those research projects, they each directed their research differently depending on their own interests and the stories they wanted to tell with these pieces. And also, I think this is important to say, that research is directed by the objects. Some objects require or facilitate or invite different kinds of research, right? So for example, one of the pieces that a student was researching was the 6th century brooch, probably made in Merovingian Francia, present-day France, Germany, Switzerland, that area. And we don't have much documentation from that period at all. Works like that are primarily found archaeologically. Many of them have been dug up without what we might consider responsible archaeological documentation. We don't have a lot of texts from that period that can help us to support how they might have been used. So the kinds of research that are invited by that piece, the student found technical paths in, looking at it using imaging techniques like RTI, thinking about the materials and how it's a silver gilt piece with garnets, and how do those materials reflect people's priorities, or how are they thinking about those materials at the time. We know that these are objects. It's a brooch. It's like basically a big fancy safety pin. We know that they were worn, and so thinking about how it would have been worn by a person and then projected some ideas about that person, much like we wear jewelry today. So that, for her, those were the paths in because of what we do and don't have available information-wise about a piece like that. Another student was working on a piece, a couple of students actually had pieces that were from the later Middle Ages, and they were in other media, but they were based on known prints, right? So there were images that had been developed as book illustrations and then had been kind of translated into enamel, or in one case into this really beautiful carved piece of mother of pearl. And so there, then there is the material. We can think about enamel. We can think about how you get mother of pearl in Europe. It's imported probably from the Red Sea or the Indian Ocean, from quite far away. But then we can also, if we can sort of trace this history of how the printed image developed, and we get a whole different kind of sense of, what kinds of texts was that image paired with. And so that can really direct research in different kinds of ways. So I think many of the students in that class did what I encouraged them to do, which is to really let the object direct where they're going to go. It's great to come in with questions about the period. It's great to think about what a work can tell us about the period, but to some extent, the object itself should, I think, direct what kinds of research we can do and determines what is or isn't available.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So we have a few questions that have come in. I'm going to jump to one on the object that you spoke about. And we have somebody with a question asking, what makes you think that the Gemellion was owned by someone who had aspirations of positioning themselves among upper classes and was not created by someone who was trumpeting a more secure sense of being in that social or political milieu?
Yeah, sorry,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Take it away.
Okay, I was going to say it's a great question, and it's one that if I had another 5 minutes to talk about this, I might have gotten to. So let me just let me share my screen one more time and bring that image back up. I was saying here that some of this imagery is fairly generic. Some of it is not. Let me just come down. I'm sorry. Let me advance the slide here, and you can see some of these coats of arms are more specific to known, very wealthy individuals. But the thing that suggests to me that this, even though we have here a coat of arms that is referencing the King and Queen of France, the thing that suggests to me that this was not made for a member of that family, the royal family, or any royal family, is that the quality of the piece isn't really that high. So it's, I mean, we are in the aristocracy, right? To be able to afford a piece like this, you are in the wealthy elite of society. But if you were in the royal family, you would use a Gemellion, but you might use a much nicer one. Many of these survived. The works from Limoges were often produced. Mass production might give us not quite the right idea. We sometimes say it produced in series. They were using techniques that were kind of bordering on mass production because they were making so many of them. So they often are not heavily personalized for one particular owner. And we sort of imagine that because of that, that they come in not at that really high price point, but somewhere in the middle ground. If you were the king, or if you were in that circle, you would have one made of nicer materials. You would have one that was more obviously personalized for you. So that's what I'm basing that on. It is, however, I will say, a problem with medieval art. Often we don't necessarily have great documentation. As we get later, it gets better. This was made probably in the 13th century. It's not surprising to me that we don't have a clear sense of who owned this. It's probably been through many different owners since it was first made. But it does look like a larger class of objects. We have quite a few of these armorial Gemellions surviving in many different collections, and they're all quite similar to each other. And so the fact that it's this larger class of objects also suggests that it's something that's not at that very elite price point, but somewhere a little lower down the scale.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have another question. Wondering what was an exciting or illuminating piece of information that you uncovered during the development of the exhibition, and maybe in conjunction with that, what is your favorite item in the collection, if you can get to both of those?
I don't know if I can answer that. There are so many wonderful pieces in this show. So many of them are beautiful, beautiful to our own eyes, beautiful to in terms of the past aesthetics and the kind of accomplishment of the piece. And so many of them open up different ways of talking. I had mentioned in my talk earlier that one of the students who was in the seminar with me was working on a piece that was made of mother of pearl. And that, I don't want to say it's my favorite piece. I'm it's like, you know, I'm a mother. I can't tell you that I have one favorite child, and I kind of feel that way about the works in this show. So many of them are wonderful and have their own amazing qualities and stories to tell. But that mother of pearl piece is really stunning in a lot of ways, and I think that you know, two points that really stuck out to me. One is that I probably, before I came to the show, I would have suspected that mother of pearl, that people in the Middle Ages thought in certain ways about it. They probably had some kind of symbolic ideas about what it stood for. But then I was able to learn, as my student was able to learn, much more about the specifics of that, about the ways in which people were taking many aspects of this material. So I don't have an image of it, but mother of pearl, in case you don't, when I'm saying that, if you're not familiar with it, nacre is another word for it, or abalone. It's the interior of some shells produced by some mollusks, has this very iridescent, shiny kind of surface. And if there's enough of a buildup, people can remove that surface and work with it and carve it. And so it has this, you know, it's this sort of like pinky, yellowy, pearlescent, iridescent kind of sheen to it. And then people read so much into that in a spiritual sense of making connections between what they knew about the origin of the object and its appearance, and really pretty complex ideas related to the incarnation of Christ and the Virgin Mary. And we find that in a lot of medieval art. They're very Christocentric. We see a lot of heavy-duty theological Christian thinking going into these works. It was really illuminating to think about how much meaning they could find in this material, or use this material to create. And then at the same time to learn a little bit more about the economics and the trade of mother of pearl, where it was coming from, how it would have been valued at the time. So that was primarily research that I didn't conduct, that Olivia in the seminar did that work, and Olivia Morrow, and shared it with me, and so I really learned from her about that, and I just found that opened up whole new ways for me of thinking about some of the materials that were being used in the later Middle Ages.
Wonderful. And so I think we're almost out of time, so we have maybe time for one more question. And I think there's a few questions asking about what came into like considering the design of the exhibit. Specifically, there's a question about what are the challenges with presenting art from this type of era in a contemporary museum? And also just questions about how your curatorial decisions worked with like teaching courses. And yeah, just questions about basically what factors went into your design of the exhibit itself.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I want to start off by saying is that although I'm the curator of this show, it is really a joint collaborative project. And all of those decisions were made with consultation with other people. And, you know, I think particularly Elizabeth Humphrey and Anne Collins Goodyear have just been instrumental to me in deciding what to do with this, right? That they present options, I think about those options, or I present options, they help me narrow them down, they suggest things I would never have thought of. And so you know, it would be nowhere without that kind of collaborative effort. And even, I mean, even as far as like the color of the walls go, that was you know, there was so much back and forth about what color we would decide to paint the walls. And then kind of we were getting close to the deadline and we hadn't really decided on one that we liked. And one of the museum staff, that we had just gotten the catalog in, and she was looking at the cover of the catalog and thought that the blue colors and the color of the catalog were wonderful, and suggested that to one of the art preparators, and he suggested it to me, and then we jointly arrived at this just, you know, stunningly beautiful blue color, which you can see in the background behind me. You know, so a lot of those decisions are really made jointly, and I think that any exhibition is really richer because of that collaborative engagement that happens. It is challenging, though, to think about presenting works from a very different era and making them understandable and accessible, but also making them appealing, right? I mean, we go to museums, we call things art because we want to see something beautiful. And as time goes by, I mean, first of all, works get damaged. You know, if we think back, I won't bring it back up again, but if we think back to that Gemellion, that suffered a lot of wear. It would have been much, much shinier. The colors would have been richer. The surface would have been this beautiful copper, warm, reddish gold color. And that is just lost because it's 800 years old. And, you know, it's been tossed around. It doesn't look that good anymore. But aesthetics change also. You know, our sense of what we prioritize, what we think of as beautiful changes. So to find ways to make old art or art from a different culture, to make that appealing and engaging as well as informative, that I find to be a really exciting challenge, and one that I hope we have achieved, although my own love for the period might in some ways cloud my judgment about what actually looks great. But I think, you know, I think that the installation really shows off many of these works to great advantage, and I hope that it allows people to really see them as beautiful, accomplished works that took a lot of skill and time and thought, even if they don't quite fit into what we might think of as being, you know, a master painting or something.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this great presentation. I think we all learned a little something new during our lunch break this Wednesday. And for everybody who is curious to learn more, you should absolutely register for the event tonight at 7 p.m. I'll put the link in the chat. And I hope that this conversation can continue. Again, thank you for this fantastic presentation.
And thanks again for inviting me, and thanks to everyone who joined in. This has been a great way for me to spend my lunch break.